Hello there, thanks for joining us. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to avoid losing your Canadian permanent residency status. After going through all the hassle of becoming a Canadian permanent resident, the last thing you want is to end up losing your status as a Canadian permanent resident. So we'll be talking more about this in this video. As always, remember to hit the subscribe button and to check us out on our website at go.gooselaw.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back. My name is Donovan Francis and I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer, and I help skilled workers inside Canada and outside Canada to become Canadian permanent residents without having to deal with all of the complicated immigration forms that are part of that process. If you're already inside Canada as a permanent resident, then what that means is that you would have been enjoying most of the rights and benefits that a Canadian citizen enjoys. Of course, there are a few exceptions. You would not be able to vote as a Canadian citizen would. You would not be able to hold public office as a Canadian citizen would. And there would be an obligation on you to meet what's called a residency requirement, which is you would need to show that you would have been living in Canada for at least 730 days or 2 years within the last 5-year period. Now, so outside of those requirements, the Canadian permanent residents enjoy the same or similar benefits as Canadian citizens. However, that said, Canadian permanent residents can lose their status as Canadian PRs. And this is possible in situations where a permanent resident is convicted of a serious offense. For instance, there's a risk of the permanent residency status being lost. There's also you technically lose your status as a permanent resident when you become a citizen, which would not be a bad reason to be losing your status. And thirdly, you could lose your status as a Canadian permanent resident if you have not met the minimum residency requirement of 730 days within a 2-year period, and resulting from that, the immigration authorities move to have your status revoked. So those are three ways in which you, as a permanent resident, could lose your status in Canada. Now, it's important to make a distinction between your Canadian permanent residency status and your Canadian permanent residency card, your PR card. So the PR card is a document that the government issues to PR holders to allow them to be identified as people who have a permanent residency status in Canada. But your PR card and your PR status are two different things. Your PR card, typically, with some exceptions, expire every 5 years. But your status doesn't expire. Your status remains that of a permanent resident of Canada. However, you need to apply to have your PR card, which identifies you as a permanent resident of Canada. You need to apply to have that card renewed. All right? So that's an important distinction, and it's something that people get confused about on occasions. The two are separate, and one is purely for identification purposes. That said, you, as indicated earlier, there is the possibility that there's a risk that your status as a PR, as a permanent resident, and by status it means your ability to remain here as a permanent resident, you are at risk of losing that if at the time, when it becomes necessary for you to renew your PR card, it is discovered that you were not inside Canada, physically inside Canada for at least 730 days within the last 5 years. And of course, there are some exceptions to that, but generally speaking, that is the requirement. And so if your PR card has expired and is up for renewal, and you've discovered that you weren't physically inside Canada for 730 days during the last 5 years, then you will want to be sure that you're not applying and drawing the immigration authorities attention to the issue, because the critical thing to note is that you can only lose your permanent residency status when the immigration authorities they start a formal process to revoke your status, right? And that formal process is likely to be triggered when you apply to get your PR card renewed and it turns out that you've not met the residency requirement. So you want to ensure that at the point you're applying to get your PR card renewed, that you would have met that 2-year, that 730-day or 2-year in Canada requirement at that point in time. If it turns out that your PR card has expired and you're outside of Canada and you have not met the residency requirement while you're outside Canada, then flying to Canada or attempting to fly to Canada may trigger a formal action by the immigration authorities to have your status revoked. And so you might want to reconsider whether or not you're going to be flying back into Canada or whether or not you're going to be driving into Canada from the US. If that's not an option, then alternatively you may be looking at having your lawyer prepare what's called an H&C application, a humanitarian and compassionate application, or rather an application on humanitarian and compassionate grounds. And this typically is a last resort. H&C is typically a last resort, and it entails you pretty much saying, you know what, I'm requesting that my status be restored or that my status not be revoked because I have, as an example, I have children who are inside Canada or who are Canadians, and it's going to be in their best interest that my status not be revoked. Or it may be that you're arguing that I have extensive ties inside Canada, I have property, I have some other ties that makes it difficult for me to lose my status, and so on and so forth. Or you might want to be arguing in that H&C application that it really would be hazardous and detrimental to you if you were removed from Canada and be forced to return to your home country, that may put your life at risk, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, as a last resort, an H&C application might be the way to go. However, the most important thing in these kinds of situations is to get legal advice, because remember, there are always exceptions and exemptions, and you want to be clear on the process before you go ahead and start actioning it. So I trust you found value from this, and as usual, do remember to hit the subscribe button and to check us out on our website at go.gooselaw.com.